Hello again, College Writing 101 students. This is video number 7 in this series on critical thinking. Accompanying your text, You Are Not So Smart. And in video 5, we talked about heuristics and biases. And in video 7, we talked about logical fallacies, these things right up here. And in this video, I'd like to talk about emotional blinders. And this is particularly interesting, I think, for me because psychology is, all about trying to understand what it means to be a human being. And if you're going to be a good writer, writers are really involved in that. We're trying to understand what it means to be a human being, all of the aspects of humanness. And part of humanness is our own blindness, that we are blind to so much around us. And part of the fun of being human is waking up to that blindness so that we see and understand and become more aware of what's around us. And that takes some work, takes some real introspection, some real soul searching, etc. So when we're talking about cognitive weaknesses and emotional blinders, we just sort of start out with that statement that says humans are not inherently logical. We tend to be emotional beings first, and then we tend to use our reasoning to justify our emotions. That's called motivated reasoning. So we're motivated to reason one way or the other. We're not objectively reasoning. We have very subjective, emotional motives that are shaping the way we think we're reasoning. That's the conundrum. One of the difficult things about being a human being. So let's just talk a moment. I'm no psychologist, but I think this is a fun thing to talk about. You and your classmates should probably sit down and talk about these things, or it'd be a good thing to write about is what is it human beings need, and how do those needs, what are those emotional needs, and how do those emotional needs shape our thinking? So I've made some notes here, and I'm gonna go through a few of them. First of all, let's talk about, there seems to be a need to be right. Especially some people more so than others, they just need to be right. And they will argue forever about how right they are. And they will also oftentimes fall victim then to what's called confirmation bias. In other words, they will reach out to all sorts of information that already agrees with what they are thinking. Whatever their preconceived notion or agenda or issue stance is, they will seek out and mine information that agrees with them, and they will refuse to hear anything that doesn't agree with them. That's called confirmation bias. They want things that will confirm what they already believe, and they push away things that might challenge what they already believe. And because they want to be right. Next video, video number 8, I'm going to spend the entire video talking about confirmation bias because I think it's really important. So that's the first one, the need to be right. How about the need to fit in? We have a need to fit in. And one of the ways we have that need to fit in, I think, again, I'm no psychologist, but just trying to get you thinking and talking and maybe discussing, need to fit in. Don't you have a need to fit in, to feel like you're the normal one? Right? Everybody else is a little whacked, but you're normal. Here's an example of that is what we think of as common sense. So it's called the illusion of common sense. This emotional blinder is called the illusion of common sense. We say, you're never too old to learn, right? Isn't that a wise saying? Isn't that just common sense? You're never too old to learn. Oh, that sounds right. Okay. So I believe that. I'm a normal person. But then again, here's another one that says, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. that sounds like common sense. It also sounds wise, and I'm a normal person, so I want to believe you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But wait a minute, those two things are contrary. You're never too old to learn. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Something's wrong there, right? And neither of those are common sense. They're simplistic thinking. But we want to believe they're common sense because we want to just believe that we have common sense. Other people lack common sense, of course, but we have common sense. Then the need for a sense of control in our own lives and in the world around us. We are uncomfortable with uncertainty and randomness and unpredictability. So if you read chapter 5 in your textbook, talks about the Texas Sharpshooter fallacy. And that's all about, it's a great video, by the way, if you go to YouTube, from David McRaney from the textbook You Are Not So Smart. He's made this great video of the Texas Sharpshooter fallacy that shows how because we are uncomfortable with randomness, we like to look at clusters of things that happen and give them all sorts of meaning bigger than what they really are. So we're trying to make meaning out of randomness. And oftentimes that's where a lot of conspiracy thinking and stuff like that comes from. Your last chapter in your textbook talks about what's called the fundamental attribution error, where we tend to look for external causes to explain our behavior. We take credit for our successes and blame our failures on circumstance or on people around us or something else. That's the fundamental attribution error. You see how it's an emotional blinder? We want to believe that we are in control of the world around us. And if something goes wrong in our lives, now all of a sudden we don't want to take credit for that. We want to blame it on other people around us. So that's an emotional blinder that happens there. Or here's one. How about the need for self-esteem? You know, isn't that happening? We all want to feel good about ourselves. We all want to have some self-esteem. People are always trying to help us with our self-esteem. Chapter 11 in your textbook is what's called the Dunning-Kruger Effect. That's really interesting. There's some good videos on YouTube, too, if you go there, about the Dunning-Kruger Effect, in which if you're a beginner learning something, say, for instance, you're learning to play guitar, and so you learn 3 chords. You learn C and G and F. And now you got the key of C, and you realize that a lot of songs are made out of 3 chords. And so now you know 3 chords, and you can play a lot of, half a dozen songs with those 3 chords. And all of a sudden you think, hey, playing guitar is easy. I'm a really good guitar player. I must have a lot of natural talent here. So you're vastly overestimating your own talent, and you're vastly underestimating the complexity of the whatever area you're looking at, in this case, guitar playing. So that's the Dunning-Kruger effect. We're overestimating our competency at complex tasks. We're underestimating the complexity of those tasks. And so that's the need for self-esteem. So, need for self-esteem, and there's another one called self-serving bias. It's a lot like the fundamental attribution error, where we tend to excuse our failures and then blame them on everybody else. So, because we don't like to look at ourselves and think that we're in charge of our failures, even though we like to think, on the other hand, that we're in control of the world around us. So another one is a desire for simplicity, right? Desire for simplicity. We would like the world to be a lot more simple than it is. That leads to a lot of simplistic thinking, like false dichotomies and things like that we've talked about. But another one, and a really interesting thing, is what's called normalcy bias. It's one of the chapters also in your textbook, in the normalcy bias, because we need simplicity. And if the world were simple, it would also be consistent and easy to predict. So in the normalcy bias, people get in real trouble because they want the world to be simple around them. And then something really strange happens and we deny it. We don't even look at it. We can't even comprehend it because we're not willing to accept the difficult world we live in, the complexities of that world, and sometimes the dangers of that world. And so that's denial. And denial is one of our emotional blinders. That's just a kind of short overview of all sorts of ways in which we have emotional blinders. And I really hope you do some thinking about this and take some psychology courses, etc., sociology courses, and learn about what it is to be a human being. Observe yourself and other people around you. Get in some good conversations about what is it that we need emotionally, because our emotions and our reasons are connected inextricably. And if we want to understand our reasoning, we also have to understand our emotions. And again, just to remind you, we're doing all this because we want you to be a good writer. And to be a good writer, you have to be a good thinker. And to be a good thinker, you have to realize that sometimes your emotions get in the way. So, video 8, we'll talk about confirmation bias. That'll be up next.